Good morning to those watching in the United States. Good afternoon in Europe. I'm Ben Haddad. I'm the director of the Europe Center at the Atlantic Council. And I'm really honored to introduce today a conversation with the president of the European Council, Mr. Charles Michel. You know how important the relationship with Europe, the European Union is for the Atlantic Council. As both sides of the Atlantic face tremendous challenges from the pandemic, global warming, an economic crisis, technological transition, and a more assertive China, these times call more than ever for a strong transatlantic bond. And Europe Center at the Atlantic Council will be at the center of this effort, engaging with the European Union, partnering with the European delegation in Washington and Ambassador Lambrinidis to launch a major campaign to reset, to celebrate, to reshape the future of US-EU relations in the United States and in Washington all year long. So it's really fitting that we're welcoming President Michel to launch this campaign this year. President Michel, you're a child of the European Union. You've been a student of Erasmus. You were the Prime Minister of Belgium, elected in 2014. And of course, you've been the President of the European Council since 2019. In a moment of incredible challenge for the European Union, but also opportunities and deeper union, especially with the recovery package negotiated last year. We'll be talking about all the challenges from China, economic issues, trade, Russia, and the climate with our president and CEO, Fred Kemp, but also with a panel of experts that we've assembled here today to ask you questions. Once again, thank you for joining us. Monsieur le Président, bienvenue à l'Atlantic Council. And let me turn it to you, Fred.
Thank you, Ben, and congratulations on the launch of our Europe Center last week with President Macron of France. It may seem odd that the Atlantic Council would launch a Europe Center because all of the Atlantic Council is a Europe Center, Mr. President. Across our 14 programs and centers, whether we're working on Africa, whether we're working on the Middle East, whether we're working on technology or economics, we're working with our European partners. A couple of housekeeping notes. For our viewers, we're going to be on the hashtag AC front page across all social media platforms. You can submit your questions in the Q&A function in chat. We'll try to get to them, as well as Ben said, the panel of experts. This is part of the launch of the Atlantic Council's Europe Center. But even more than that, and I'm glad that the Ambassador Stavros Lambrinidis is on this call as well. It is all part of our work with the European Union, which is always intense, but this week, this year, in the beginning of the Biden administration, particularly so. And just to build upon this even more, Mr. President, February 23rd, after your appearance today, we will speak with the High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Josep Borrell. So let me get right to the questions. And Mr. President, I think before I get to issues of U.S.-European relations, EU relations, I think I'd like people to get to know you a little bit. Not everyone in the United States, I'm not even sure everyone in Europe understands exactly what the President of the European Council does. You sit in one of the most powerful tables in the world. You have a unique, some would say, unenviable position of having to bring 27 member states leaders together, each with their own domestic political interests. So I have really two questions off of this. A year and a half into your term, global pandemic, historic EU recovery budget deal, what do you see as the most important skills for your job? And then secondarily, what have you learned in this job about the strengths of the European Union? I guess there's a third question, which is, are you the person Henry Kissinger calls, or is it a conference call with Ursula von der Leyen and Macron and Angela Merkel? So, we'll get that number to Dr. Kissinger, who is the longest serving member of the Atlantic Council Board, by the way. So, Mr. President, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your job and what you've learned in it.
First of all, it's a real pleasure for me to have this opportunity to meet you. Good morning and good afternoon in Europe. But you are right. The European project is an exciting project. It's a unique political project. If you remember, after the Second World War, when a few political leaders took the decision to build this very strong common ambition in order to develop more hopes for peace, for prosperity. But it means that we are 27 countries together. We are 27 governments with domestic realities, with 27 national parliaments. And it means that an important goal for me in my capacity is to work day after day in order to make Europe more united. It's very important in my opinion because our unity is our strength, and it's never easy. You can imagine that it means that we need to be very active, to work very hard. I think that an important skill is the fact that I need first to listen actively, to understand very well what are the different legitimate concerns around the table, but I need also to be able to make some concrete proposals. Sometimes I need to be innovative in order to make sure that it's possible for all the member states to support a common approach. And there is maybe one paradox. Last year, with COVID-19 pandemic and with this huge crisis, we had the opportunity in Europe to take very strong decisions. And maybe it's a lesson in Europe when we face crisis, when it's difficult, then sometimes it's easier to take decisions together. What we did in July last year with this very important decision, the recovery package and the next European budget. But of course, now we have many challenges that we need to tackle. We need to implement the recovery strategy. And I would like to add that with the new Biden administration, there is also in Europe a feeling of hope and the expectation that it will be possible with this new administration. It's really our hope to rebuild a very strong alliance, what I have called a new founding pact between the United States and Europe.
So I'm going to come back to that new founding pact with my next question, but let me ask you one more question about yourself. I think it's you're the second Belgian prime minister to hold this office since the role was created in 2009. I lived in Belgium for several years. It was the headquarters for the Wall Street Journal Europe, which I was running. And I think I learned quite a bit playing basketball there, where members of my team would get a technical foul if they were speaking French in a Dutch-speaking gym with a referee. But in any case, there is something unique about the Belgian system. And there is something unique about Belgian politics. And I just wonder how Belgian politics, and you started Belgian politics at age 16, young liberal reformer. How does this prepare you or uniquely qualify Belgian prime ministers for this role?
It's correct that the Belgian institutions are very complex. This is a country with a complex institutional model, with the Flemish part of Belgium, the French-speaking part of Belgium in the south, with Brussels in the middle, and it's a country with more than 1,000 different beers. It means that it's very difficult to run a country with so many different beers in the countries. More seriously, we have many parliaments, and this is of course sometimes a difficult situation. But it's probably right that in Belgium we need to be innovative. We need, if we want to make compromises possible, we need to take into consideration different criteria, and it's useful at the European level. It doesn't mean, based on the treaty, that it's necessary to be Belgian in order to be president of the European Council, but it means indeed that the experience in Belgium is probably useful in order to try to build day after day this spirit of compromise. It's also right that the last months with this pandemic, we worked a lot in order to make sure that we were able to take decisions together, even if very difficult circumstances.
Thank you, Mr. President. So now let's turn to the what you said about the feeling of hope with the Biden administration, the new pact that you're talking about. Both European officials, Biden administration officials, have spoken of this hope and have signaled strong commitments to the renewal of the transatlantic partnership. But I'd like to get more concrete about this. What do you see as there are quite a number of items in the action agenda. What do you see as the priority items? Is there low-hanging fruit here, things that we can get done quickly?
The first priority that I would like to mention is the importance, in my opinion, to cooperate more at the international level for the multilateral model. Because even if I don't want to speak too much over the past and about the past, I have the impression that the recent years, the choice made by the previous administration gave the impression that the United States were less involved in the international model. And for Europe, multilateralism is part of our DNA. We think for global challenges that we need global solutions. And if it's possible again to work together in the framework of the multilateral model, in the framework of the international cooperation, it would be good, in my opinion, for the United States, it would be good for Europe and even for the world, because we share the same values and because our values inspire what we try to do at the international level. And if I want to be more concrete, I give one concrete example, climate change. In Europe, we think this is an important challenge, and that's why the Paris Agreement for us is a top priority. My first meeting in my new capacity 1 year ago of President of the European Council, we took a fundamental decision. We decided to make Europe climate neutral by 2050, and we try also to engage with other countries, other regions in the world, in order to convince that it's important to work together in order to reach together those common goals. And the fact that Joe Biden, immediately after his inauguration, took the decision to rejoin the Paris Agreement is, in my opinion, something that's very positive, because it means, if we share the same goals, that we can work together at the international level in order to make sure that other countries, other regions in the world will have the same ambition. And I really hope, this one example, there are other examples, that we will cooperate a lot with the United States, and I hope that this cooperation will be substantial, not only with speeches, but really by deciding together to implement our priorities.
Thank you, Mr. President. We certainly at the Atlantic Council believe that this could be a transformative moment for the transatlantic relationship for a lot of the reasons you've cited, but there are impediments as well. And I wonder where you see the greatest challenges. What are the areas you think are going to be hardest? What might be the biggest obstacles, impediments that we're going to have to deal with?
I try not to be naive. I know even if it will be possible to reopen a good channel of dialogue, a good channel of communication. I know that some topics will be difficult. I know, for example, that the trade questions are very difficult and that there are different sensitivities. But at the same time, I think that even when it's difficult, it's important to tackle the topic and to see what are the possibilities in order to build concrete solutions. I'm very concrete. You know that there is a dispute between the United States and Europe about this Boeing Airbus case. I hope we will be able to make progress and to find acceptable solutions, because there is a paradox. When we have those disputes, the United States and Europe on those topics, at the same time, another important country in the world, China, is developing more and more leadership in this field, and it is a clear demonstration that we need to find a common approach. We need to find acceptable solutions. Trade, in my opinion, we should also consider that climate change is an important topic when it comes to trade. That's why we would like to develop this idea that the Paris Agreement, in our opinion, has to be part in the future of all the trade agreements.
Thank you for that. And I couldn't agree more with Airbus and Boeing fighting with each other at a moment when you might have a Chinese Airbus or Boeing in very short order. I think those are good things to point out. I'm going to turn to our first intervener in a second, Alan Schiffer from our North Europe office of the Atlantic Council in Sweden. But before I do that, I'm going to ask my own question on a term that is an insider debate right now. And I think a lot of our viewers may not be totally familiar with it, but there's a lot of talk about strategic autonomy in Europe right now. And some of my European friends in Central and Eastern Europe and Northern Europe also aren't entirely sure they agree with the term or want the term. And I know this is an ongoing debate in Europe. So how do you see a consensus emerging on this? And if the EU pursues a course of strategic autonomy, how do you reconcile that with the future of the transatlantic partnership?
It's an important question, and I would like to try to be very clear. What's the meaning, in my opinion, of this concept of strategic autonomy or strategic sovereignty? The meaning is the following. In one sentence, it means more resilience, less dependence, and more influence. And this should be our common goal. Why? Because we think that it's very good for this transatlantic alliance if both sides of this alliance are stronger, are more robust. And COVID-19 was an interesting moment because it was also the demonstration that we need to be less dependent. I give you a very concrete example. At the beginning of the crisis, we discovered in Europe that it was difficult for us to be able to provide basic medical equipment, like masks, for example. We were too much dependent. And it means, indeed, that we need in the future to be less dependent. This is one example. At the security level, I think it's good, it's very important if Europe is more responsible in order, for example, to invest more, in order to develop a more common approach on defense, on security. What we have started to do, you know that many member states, many European member states took the decision to invest more in our common defense in the framework of NATO. And that's why I understand very well that there are some questions about strategic autonomy. What does it mean? What does it mean for the future of the relationships and its alliance with the United States? But I have one absolute personal conviction. If Europe is stronger, if Europe is more robust, if Europe is more able to provide capabilities in order to guarantee our common security, it's good for our common alliance. And I think also at the economic level, at the trade level, there's an important question. This is a question of the fairness. We have the impression in Europe that the last years, the recent years, we took the decision to open our single markets, but not necessarily systematically with the same level of reciprocity. And that's why we think at the international level that more reciprocity, more fairness is needed. And because we share the same values with the United States, we are convinced that at the international level we can try to advocate and to exercise more positive influence. I can give another example. The question of the carbon leakage, which is also in relationship with the climate change. It's a concern in the United States, it's a concern in Europe. I hope that it will be possible to discuss with the United States, to have a fruitful debate, a fruitful dialogue in order to make progress and to make sure that we are able to find some common principles in order to bring more fairness at the international level.
Thank you. That's a wonderful answer, Mr. President. Let me turn to Alan Schiffer. And I think because you raised defense cooperation, we'll turn to Jana Puglarin afterwards. And I know she's head of Berlin office, European Council Foreign Relations. So after Ellen, we'll turn to her because I know she'll want to ask you a question about European defense cooperation. Ellen.
Yes, thank you, Fed. Mr. President, thank you for speaking with us today. It's a great pleasure to be a part of this event. I would like to ask you a question about multilateralism and strategic autonomy. The Swedish Foreign Ministry has recently announced that it will Last week, you and other political leaders launched a call for building a more inclusive multilateralism to tackle some of the more serious crises of our time. At the same time, back in September 2020, you spoke at Bruegel about strategic autonomy as the aim of our generation, where you define strategic autonomy in the terms you just said, less dependent, have more influence. So my question to you is, how can strategic autonomy complement an inclusive multilateralism? Isn't there a risk where greater multilateralism on the one hand and strategic autonomy on the other represent competing visions and goals? Thank you.
It's key, in my opinion, to be very clear. We think that the multilateral approach is needed more than ever, and the post-COVID-19 world will be the demonstration that we need more international cooperation. Let's take this example of the pandemic. We understand very well that it will not be possible to make progress and to overcome this challenge if we don't work together. And that's why there is no doubt we are committed, we are convinced that we need more international cooperation. And that's the reason for the strong European commitments in support of the United Nations, for example. We play an important role in Europe in order to support all the initiatives in the framework of the United Nations. It's also the reason for the support for the WHO, even if we think that we need to learn the lessons of this pandemic. But we think that we need to trust the international organizations, to support the international organizations. This is my first point. But when it comes to the multilateral model, it's important also to be committed in order to promote our values, to defend our interests. And what's the DNA in Europe? And I think also in the United States. We think in Europe, in the United States, that the dignity of each human being is key, that the human rights, this is an important priority for all of us. And when we work at the international level, in the framework of the international cooperation, we work in order to promote our values, to defend our interests. What's the situation today? Because of the choice made by the United States the recent years. In fact, some other countries with other political models, more authoritarian models, they have tried to occupy the space in the international framework. Take China, for example. The Chinese strategy in order to influence the international organizations has been very visible the recent years. And it's why I think really that it would be a big mistake if we would think that there would be an opposition between the support for the multilateral model on the one hand and the strategic autonomy on the other hand. The strategic autonomy in an open world, in a multilateral world, this is our common political will to exercise more influence, because our influence would be based on our values. And it's a big difference. Probably we will have the opportunity, I hope, to come back later on China, on Russia, the relationships between the United States, Europe, and China and Russia. And this is a fundamental question and a choice that we will be able to make, I hope, together, the United States, Europe, and with some other like-minded partners, will probably have an influence at the international level during the next 20 or 25 years. That's why it's important to make the right analysis, to make the right assessment of the situation, to be lucid, and then to identify what are the means, what are the tools that we intend to use in order to be more efficient and to make the world fairer, greener, and also more in accordance with those fundamental values.
So, Mr. President, because I've teed up Jana Puljurin in Berlin, I'm going to turn to her first. But then after that, I'll come to a couple of questions on China and Russia, just as you anticipated. So, Jana, let me turn to you in Berlin. And you're on mute.
Fantastic. I'm sorry. Thank you, Fred. Mr. President, you talked about the need for Europeans to become more autonomous. And in the area of security and defense, I think it's pretty obvious that the Europeans need to do more and cannot rely on the Americans to do the heavy lifting for us. So At this very moment, the member states are developing a common so-called strategic compass to define their ambitions for the EU's security and defense policy. At the same time, this very member states have halved the money for the European Defence Fund and the Military Mobility Initiative during the recent EU budget negotiations. So how can we make sure that the strategic compass that is just being developed not becomes just another paper tiger, kind of a wish list full of good European intentions, but with little consequence, actually? How can we make sure that this time the member states really provide the political will and the financial means to make this a substantial contribution to European defense and security? And who is the stakeholder in Europe to guarantee that Europeans bring more to the table? Is it President Macron? Is it the German government? So who makes sure that we really deliver?
Thank you. This is indeed an important question, and I know, of course, that it will take time because we need to make progress in order to improve the cooperation. And I would like to repeat that, in my opinion, it's very important to work closely with NATO in the framework of NATO, because this very strong partnership between North America on the one hand and Europe on the other hand is key for our security in the future. It was not only important in the past; it's very important in the future because we face new kinds of threats, and we need to adapt. We need to work together. It's my first point. My second point, I would like to insist on the fact that the recent years, and because of a very strong commitment made by Jean-Claude Juncker, the previous Commission, with the support of the member states, we made a lot of progress when it comes to the cooperation between the member states. Maybe it's not very visible, but I'm convinced that in the next months, in the next years, you will see with more clarity the progress made. Third point, if I take into consideration the question of the burden sharing and the question of the military expenditures, if you have a look at the numbers, you will observe that many member states, the majority of the member states, the recent years, they made a lot of progress on this important question. And my first observation is the following. You mentioned the fact that we would have cut the amounts for the defense fund, which is not correct. We have much more money for the defense fund in comparison with the past. If you made a comparison with a theoretical proposal put on the table by the Commission, indeed, there is less money than the request of the Commission. But in comparison with the last European budget, we put much more money on the table. And I would like to give another very concrete example, because I think we should be very concrete. Look the situation in the Sahel and the support that we try to give, not only with France, but also with other member states, European member states, in order to help the countries in the Sahel to fight against terrorism. This is a clear and a very interesting example. It's a difficult challenge, and certainly we will need to continue and to make more efforts in the future. But it's a good and an interesting example that demonstrates only in a few months more cooperation, much more cooperation between the European member states in order to support countries in this region, and in order to try to defend our security interest. And finally, last point, in my opinion, this is an important chapter: security, defense, geopolitical questions for this cooperation with the United States. I think indeed that we should develop a stronger dialogue in order to try to identify how we can work together in order to protect our security.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me turn to China, which of course is in this era of great power competition, getting the relationship with China right between the EU and US. There may be very few things that are more important. You have said the EU will choose the United States over China, but how simple is that, and how does that get done, especially not just in light of the EU's recent comprehensive agreement on investment with China. But doesn't the strategic calculus shift some when this 2020, for the first time, the European Union as a whole, China surpassed the United States as the #1 trading partner?
The relationship with China is an important question in Europe. And that's why I took the decision a few months ago to put this topic on the agenda of the European Council, because I had the impression that it was very important to have an in-depth dialogue among the member states in order to clarify our vision about the future relationship with China. And I would like to explain how we think we should consider our relationship with China. First point, it's obvious, it's very clear that we don't have the same political model, the same economic or social model. We have two different models. This is my first point. My second point is it's very clear that we want to rebalance the relationships with China, especially at the trade level, at the economic level, because we think that there is a serious concern, a serious problem, especially the question of the level playing field, the question of the reciprocity. And we think that we need to be very clear, and it's what we try to do. Third point, we think if we want to be credible in order to tackle some global challenges, that we need also to engage with China on some global challenges, like climate change or, for example, like COVID-19. And that's why each time we had the opportunity to speak directly with the Chinese authorities, and we spoke a lot the recent months with the Chinese authorities, we put on the table this question of climate change in order to try to convince China to move on this important topic, because it's important not only for climate change, it's also important for the creation of the level playing field in order to avoid being victim of this carbon leakage. And you have observed, even if we are not naive, that a few months ago, China announced its intention to make China climate neutral by 2060. This is a step. It's not enough, and we know that the implementation will be key. And finally, and maybe it's one of the most important topic, we don't paper over when it comes to the human rights, to the rule of law, the democratic values, and we support this idea that we need an independent assessment about the question of the minorities, the Uyghurs in the Xinjiang. We don't paper over when it comes to the question of Hong Kong and the security bill in Hong Kong, and that's why our member states took measures, because for us it's very important to make sure that the international agreements are respected, which is our opinion, it's not the case. But finally, one more point. I hope, and it could be a difference with the last years, that we will have an in-depth debate, the Biden administration and the European authorities. I hope that we will work together in order to identify what are our common goals at the international level. We want more fairness, more predictability, we want more stability. And on the other hand, what are the more appropriate tools? What are the means that we are ready to mobilize in order to reach our common goals? This is my vision about China, and you observe, I hope, that we have an approach based on this idea that we need to promote our common values, that we need to defend our interests, but we need also to engage with China on some global challenges, because it's also our interest to engage with China on climate change or on COVID-19. One word, finally, on this investment agreement, because I know, especially in the United States, that there were some doubts about the question: is it appropriate to decide now on such a topic? A few words about that. First, we started the negotiations on this investment agreement 7 years ago. 7 years ago, point one. Point two, I recognize that this agreement certainly is not perfect, but this is a good step, in my opinion, an important step in the right direction, because with this agreement, it means that European businesses will have more access to this important and huge market in comparison with the current situation. It's very concrete. I give one concrete example: the creation of the joint ventures, the condition in China systematically in many sectors to have joint ventures in order to be able to invest. They accept it to adapt their visions about this kind of creation. I think that it means it's important for the business if it's possible to overcome some barriers, important barriers that are existing today. But again, we know that the implementation will be important. And by the way, you know that the European Parliament will have to express its opinion on this agreement, and then we'll be very careful and cautious when it comes to the implementation of such an agreement.
Let's stick with that investment agreement for 1 minute. It raises two questions in my mind. And as you know, the new National Security Advisor actually suggested in a tweet that it might be better to take a breath and compare some notes with each other before things like this went forward. So you have a situation where one can either compete with each other regarding one of the most interesting markets in the world, China. And that's not just transatlantic, it's also within Europe and within countries in Europe. Or one can negotiate with each other to get a better set of intellectual property agreements and different agreements, which we haven't really done very effectively yet across the Atlantic. How do you see this playing out, this competition for that big market and for China? And it is telling that the Chinese leadership accelerated the negotiations, made quite a few concessions for the EU after the election of Joe Biden. And then I would just add one more question to this. Is there a consensus about the agreement in Europe? I understand even in your own country, Belgium, there's some questions about whether it should go forward and whether it will be passed by all the 27 countries.
Yeah, first of all, I think that it's normal that we have a political debate, that you have a democratic debate in all the national parliaments, even in the national governments. There are debates about what's the most appropriate way of working with the different countries in the world, and that's why the European Parliament will play also an important role in this process. It's my first point. My second point, I assume I defend this agreement. Why? Because I think that this is a good step, an interesting step in the good direction. And indeed, I can give another concrete example. You know that in the past we have tried, the United States, Europe, many regions in the world, we have tried to convince the Chinese authorities to be more committed when it regarding the question of the labor and the question of the ILO, for example. Interesting, they took some very strong commitments and important commitments with regard with the ILO. Does it mean that we believe, because we would be naive, that it will be easy to implement, easy to deliver? We don't think it will be easy to implement and to deliver. But at the same time, it's an important step in order to maintain or to exercise the pressure, in order to convince the Chinese authorities to take more into consideration this question of the labor rights. For example, we don't accept the forced labor, and it's an important topic on the table. But there's an important question. If we want to defend our interest, my very simple opinion is the following: we need to speak. We need to be in a dialogue. We need to negotiate, and it takes time. And sometimes there are obstacles and there are difficulties. But what's important, in my opinion, is to focus on the goal, and the goal is certainly, I repeat again, more fairness, more reciprocity, more level playing field. And this investment agreement is a step in the right direction, in my opinion. It doesn't mean that we have solved everything. And it's an investment agreement. It's not a trade agreement.
Thank you so much for that. And there's no doubt that if democracies come negotiating with China with 50 or 60% of GDP instead of 20% of GDP, they're going to be more effective. Let me ask you a question. Let me turn to Russia, and then after that, I'll turn to our own Fran Burwell on digital policy issues, distinguished fellow of our Europe Center. On Russia, obviously Russia's been in the news since the visit to Moscow of the High Representative, EU High Representative Josep Borrell. It's the latest in a series of difficult situations that have taken place. Just reading his own blog, he says, I went to Moscow this week to test through principled diplomacy whether Russia government was interested in addressing differences and reversing the negative trend in our relations. The reaction I received points visibly in a different direction, and that, of course, had to do with the removal of 3 EU diplomats from Russia even during his trip. I wonder if you could talk not just about that specific situation, though I'd love to hear your response to that, but in general, what can the US and EU do together in the Biden administration to signal clear consequences to Russia for some of the behavior that we both have said quite a bit, but can we do even better in terms of common cause?
No, first of all, you know that we have serious concerns and serious disputes with Russia, and that's why a few years ago we took the decision to sanction Russia, and on a regular basis we renew the sanctions. Last time it was in December 2020. Is my first point, and I had the opportunity again yesterday when I met the Prime Minister of Ukraine to reaffirm the very strong and united European position, the support for the territorial integrity in Georgia, in Ukraine, the support for the sovereignty. This is my first point. My second point, I think that we need also to remain very committed in the framework of NATO, and that's why many member states are committed in the framework of NATO in order to demonstrate that we are very firm, that we are very, very clear. And about this visit of Borrell to Moscow, just one word: we don't accept the Russian behavior, and we had the opportunity to be very clear and to explain, for example, that we don't accept what they are doing with Mr. Navalny, and the EU, we have expressed a very united and a very firm position on this situation and the unacceptable behavior of Russia. Another important point, and I would like to be very clear, we are not intimidated by Russia, and indeed we hope with the United States, with the UK, that we can coordinate, that we can cooperate in order to be tough, in order to be firm, to remain calm. We will remain calm in order to defend our interests, and we know that Russia is developing some hostile activities using hybrid threats, disinformation, fake news, not only alongside the eastern borders of Europe, but also in the south of Europe. And you know that in the south of Europe, in Libya, in Syria, and sometimes in agreement with Turkey, which is member of NATO. It is also an important question that we should take into consideration. They are taking initiatives that are not necessarily in line with the European and, in my opinion, the American interest.
So there's so many questions from the audience. We're just not really going to get to very many of them, but because this one is related, Zinoviy Broida writes about the 3 Seas initiative, which he considers a huge anchor project of common EU and Euro-Atlantic interests in Central and Central Eastern Europe. So ask your view about that, but particularly, would it be a good time for Ukraine and Moldova? Right now, it's only members of the EU that are members of this. Would it be a good time for Ukraine and Moldova to be integrated in this 12 EU members initiative?
You know that we have tried to develop a strong ambition for what we call the Eastern Partnership. But I should recognize that the situation in some of those countries is not easy. The situation in Belarus is complex. The conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia is also a big challenge for Europe, but not only for Europe, I think. And certainly Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova, they have another level of cooperation with the European Union, because we have with those three countries an association agreement which is ambitious, and our goal is to strengthen the ties with those countries based on the own merits of those countries. I will have the opportunity to travel to those countries in the very short term, because I would like to strengthen our partnership, to be more concrete in order to demonstrate the added value of this alliance partnership between Europe and those countries. And it's very concrete, and maybe I would like to add, we need to be concrete, not only to be general. I think we need to work on investments, we need to work on connectivity, transport, energy sector. There are many fields in which we need to be concrete in order also to demonstrate to the citizens in those countries that the European choice is the right choice because of our values, because of our fundamental freedoms. This is very important because we don't underestimate the role played by some other countries in order to try to exercise more influence in those regions. And that's why also we take into consideration the importance when it comes to the vaccines, the COVID-19 vaccines, to demonstrate a clear and a concrete solidarity with those countries.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I couldn't embrace more the idea of concrete solutions. And it's part of the reason the Atlantic Council has really tried to be partners with the EU and the 12 countries in the 3 Cs initiative, because there's a lot good that can happen there. Let me turn to Fran Burwell. Just aligned with that, we have Kelly Myman in the questions from the audience talking about the concept of digital sovereignty as well, and wondering how can you take on China while at the same time arguing digital sovereignty? Are there contradictions there with the US? I'm sure Fran might be able to put that question or another question even better. Let me turn to you, Fran.
So, Mr. President, thank you so much for joining us today. I think as we work to rebuild the US-EU relationship, a key challenge will be our disparate approaches to technology and digital regulation. The EU has embraced the rhetoric of digital and tech sovereignty, and you yourself have made clear that strategic autonomy requires digital sovereignty. But there are many concerns, as my friend Kelly has indicated, on this side of the Atlantic, that the reality is reflected in, for example, the exclusion of non-EU companies from the governance of Gaia X, and the expectation that the gatekeepers identified under the proposed Digital Markets Act will be mostly, if not exclusively, American. How do you understand digital sovereignty, and how does it help us bridge transatlantic differences over data transfers post-Schrems decision, or digital taxation, which we're now working on at the OECD? How does it help us set joint standards for cybersecurity, AI, and keeping our tech infrastructure safe? Thank you.
And Mr. President, I just want to let you know, Fran's been a real leader at the Atlantic Council with Jörn Fleck and others of hoping that we can create a transatlantic digital marketplace. And we see this as a really big and important initiative. But Mr. President, over to you.
No, thank you. This is a very exciting topic and an important topic for the future. And probably you know that when we decided to launch this ambitious recovery strategy a few months ago, we decided that we will base our strategy on 2 pillars: climate change. I spoke a lot about that, but also the digital ambition. And I think it's very important to cooperate again with the United States. And that's why, in order to be very concrete, we put on the table this idea to work together on what we call a digital rule book in order to identify what are the common principles. Maybe in order also to try to clarify the framework for our businesses, the European businesses, the American businesses. But I would like to mention, in my opinion, some challenges that we should face when it comes to the digital economic development, the artificial intelligence, the big data, etc. Point one, I think that we need to avoid making the same mistakes that we made in the past collectively with regard with the exploitation of the natural resources. Why? Because the new resources for this century will be the data, will be the big data. In the past, we have abused the natural resources, and now we understand that this is the end of a paradigm and that we need to change the paradigm. And that's why I think that we need to take into consideration the right balance. On the one hand, we need to make sure that it will be possible to exchange data and to make sure that data can be used in order to support the economic development, to develop the artificial intelligence. On the other hand, because of our common values, the privacy, the human rights, the fundamental freedoms, it's important to identify what would be the common principles in order to make sure that the citizens, the consumers, they will trust our digital framework. And I have the impression that between a state-controlled model, which is the Chinese model, in order to make sure that they control the thought of each individual on the one hand, and a model without any rules on the other hand, we should build together something that should be balanced, that should be prepared with the different stakeholders in order to make sure that we translate our values and that at the same time we are able to develop the innovation. This one important point in my opinion. I hope that it will be possible to work on all those topics. Then you mentioned another topic that's important, the digital levy or the digital taxation. And we know that there are some initiatives taken in some member states. There is also a debate at the level of the OECD. It's very clear. In Europe, what we prefer, when I speak with all my colleagues, we prefer a global solution in the framework of the OECD. It would be better. It would be a common approach. It would be a global solution. It would give more predictability, and it would be, I think, the most appropriate approach. And we will see if it's possible with the Biden administration to work together in order to make progress on this topic. But we feel in Europe, I don't know in the United States, but we feel in Europe for the SMEs, for the citizens, they feel that the current situation at the level of the digital taxation is not fair, and that we need to identify a fairer framework in order to make sure also that we keep the support of the citizens, that we keep the support of the population. And finally, you know that for us it's an important debate in Europe, because when we took the decision to invest together and to reform together, we took also the decision to develop European own resources, and the digital levy is part of this debate. It will be also a debate regarding the question of the carbon leakage with the carbon measure mechanism, and the digital levy will be on the table of the Commission, of the European Parliament in the next months. That's why it's an appropriate moment in order to discuss this topic in the framework of the OECD, and especially with the United States.
Mr. President, we're close to running out of time, so there's probably one more question here. I think if anything, this discussion shows us this really rich, dynamic, multifaceted discussion is how broad and deep the agenda for the US and the EU is. And the questions we have in the chat room, we could go on for almost a town hall with this group for another hour and a half, but we won't. We're running out of time. So I'd like to make the last issue looking at vaccine nationalism, the EU situation. Last week, together with the leaders of France, Germany, and Senegal, the European Commission and the United Nations, you penned an editorial page piece where you call for a new post-COVID-19 multilateral consensus. So my own question in this is, just tell us a little bit about this, but I really want to pass to Ambassador Rama Yad, a really powerful new addition to the Atlantic Council team. She was a French cabinet minister and is now a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council in our Africa Center and our Europe Center. So Rama, I pass to you. You're on.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you. Mr. President, welcome to the Europe Center of the Atlantic Council. I'm very happy to see you and to be in this discussion with you. I would like to draw your attention on the international response to COVID-19 pandemic. At the Atlantic Council, we are deeply attached to a world of solidarity and multilateralism. We think that those who say that is normal, that rich countries vaccine their citizens first are wrong. No one will be safe if everyone is not, since the virus has no borders. It was so easy to understand that 192 countries decided to join the COVAX initiative, an international solidarity mechanism to provide 2 billion doses of vaccines by the end of this year to immunize at least 20% of the population in 91 poor and middle income countries. But since then, all promises of solidarity have been forgotten. There will be no vaccines for everyone. And whereas more than 6 billion is needed, only 2 has already been collected. Many rich countries have purchased enough doses to vaccinate their entire population, nearly 3, 4, 5 times by the end of the year. In the meantime, China has chosen to strengthen its health cooperation with Africa, for example, as a priority of its soft power strategy. And Africa itself decided to take its own initiative without delay. The African Union has just announced that it has obtained 70 million vaccines for the continent. So, addressing its executive board in Geneva in January, the WHO chief warned against a catastrophic moral failure and reported that while 39 million doses have been administered in nearly 50 richer countries, only 25 have been given in one lowest income nation. So my question is simple. Mr. President, how do you explain this lack of solidarity from countries who still know they won't be safe alone? And since rich countries have chosen to be self-centered, don't you think that the vaccine must become a global public good? Thank you.
No, thank you. This is a very important topic, and I would like to try to convince you that you are totally committed, because we need to deliver, not only with words, but we need to be concrete, and we need to deliver. And just one concrete example. A few weeks ago, we had again a video conference at the level of the leaders, at the level of the European Council, and it was very important because there was a very clear signal, a very clear message of the 27 leaders that we remain totally committed. And if you remember, this Europe with the Commission a few months ago, which launched the Pledge Conference in order to make sure that the world would be able, in a very short term, to develop and to produce vaccines. Now we face a difficult situation. You know that Europe, through the Commission, has secured more than 1 billion doses through 6 different contracts, and we are working very hard with the Commission, with the companies, in order to make sure that they are able to produce, in order to deliver. And what does it mean? I would like to be very concrete. On the one hand, we are totally committed in order to provide financing for the COVAX facility, and it's it's very important. I can tell you, for example, that a country like Ukraine, we mentioned Ukraine a few minutes ago, by the end of February, because of COVAX, the COVAX facility, they will have access to doses. This is very concrete for this country. And it's not enough. And that's why we took the decision to work with the Commission and with the 27 member states in order to organize the possibility for the member states to donate doses. Because you are right, maybe in the next months, we will have too much doses for Europe. That's why it's important to take into consideration this important topic of solidarity. The Western Balkans, the Eastern Partnership, Africa, of course. I'm totally convinced that Europe has an important role to play in order to strengthen the partnership with Africa. And the question of the vaccines is a very important topic. I don't underestimate the vaccine strategy or the vaccine diplomacy played by some countries, Russia and China. Of course, we take this situation into consideration, but I recognize that the next weeks in Europe will be difficult because we don't have enough vaccines. We are waiting for the doses that we need. I think that in April, in May, we will have an improvement of the situation with an acceleration of the situation. And I can guarantee you, I hope I can reassure you, I hope I can convince you that for us in Europe, it's not a detail, because you are right. It's common sense. We are not safe if all the countries doesn't have access to doses and to vaccine. And I hope in a few weeks, in a few months, if I have the pleasure again to see you, that you will observe that we will have made a lot of progress on this important question.
So, Ambassador Yad, thank you for that powerful question. Mr. President, thank you for a powerful hour. Fascinating, insightful, far-reaching, and very concrete in many respects. And so we particularly thank you for that. This was part of the launch of the Atlantic Council's Europe Center. We are there at the Atlantic Council across all our 14 programs and centers, particularly this center, to be a partner with you and a partner with the European Union for this agenda you've set out for renewal in the transatlantic partnership. We do believe this could be a transformative moment. More to the point, we believe that we don't want to waste the opportunity. We want to take the opportunity. So let me pass to you with any final word you want to say, but I just want to say we are proud to have hosted you and honored to be a partner in building a stronger transatlantic community. Mr. President, back to you to close.
No, thank you. I just want to thank you and again, happy birthday and congratulations for this great initiative. And I'm convinced that it's very important, not but at all levels, it's important to think about which future do we want and how we will work in order to make sure that we will make progress and that we will take into consideration those fundamental values. This is the DNA of the United States. This is the DNA of Europe. We face many complex challenges, and only together we will be able to influence the world in order to try to build a better and a fairer world.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.